Hello and welcome to our cultural context presentation. Religion in the 16th century. The 16th century was a crucial time towards religion. Almost everyone was Roman Catholic until the Reformation swept over, resulting in various religious conflicts. In turn, the people, specifically the British, broke away from their Roman Catholic ways in favor of a different and more newly found group, the Protestants. The Protestants then surged, splitting up the people into Lutheranism, the Church of England, and Calvinism. A majority of the people, while split into their separate groups, were mainly Christian in their faith. They all hold the Bible in great value. Their views differed based on which religious groups they were in. For example, the Lutherans believed that so long as they have faith in God, they will be saved, and any mistakes in life are all cool so long as they maintain their faith. Meanwhile, Calvinists believe that everyone should have faith, but that doesn't mean you're going to be saved. Only select few people will be saved, and everyone else is just out of luck. Not very reassuring. Religion was all the rage during the 16th century. Literature and scriptures played a great role as well in aiding the development of religion via the Reformation, because so many people were reading and gaining their own intellectual thoughts and views based off their studies. The drama of the 16th century was more profoundly emphasized thanks to Shakespeare, the greatest of them all. He referenced religion in his plays, and he referenced aspects that many of the time were familiar with, such as heaven and hell. Religion held a pedestal on the priority list in the 16th century. The valuables and ethics of the 16th century. At the beginning of the 16th century, the Spanish mined American gold and silver at minimal cost and sold an abundance of these materials to the European market. The large increase of metals made the prices in this European market increase about 3 to 4 times higher in value. With the commodity prices increasing on these products, there were less incentive to buy them for monetary needs. Thus, these metals were used for non-monetary purposes. The demand for wool was becoming very high. They started enclosing open fields into smaller pastures so fewer people would be needed to take care of the sheep. Wool and cloth became one of England's chief exports. The demand for food also rose as the 16th century began a few years after the Black Death pandemic ended. Religion was a very important part to the everyday lives of the Christian people in the 16th century. They invested much of their time into the beliefs of religion and even gave inspiration to the great poet and playwright William Shakespeare. Religion was such a heavily discussed topic that many types of Christianity came to fruition, such as Lutheranism.
Hello, my name is Brianna Bowles, and my part of the presentation is on gender roles in drama. Some of the questions asked are, does gender play a role at this time? What was it like? And what is the role and status allocated to males and females? So the question asked was, does gender play a role at the time, and what was it like? On this slide, Origins of Gender Roles in the Theater, I have shown that Greeks were the first to put on plays in 532 BC, and women were seen as inferior to men, therefore stating that women would be in danger if they were to perform publicly, claiming that the men would neutralize the danger, which means that they wanted to play both the male and female parts so that the women wouldn't be in danger. This conception bled into the ways that people in different countries also loved their theaters to be like, and they did not incorporate women. The first time women were allowed to play roles in the theater was in the 17th century, when opera became popular and the new thing, and this led to more women wanting to become part of the theater, and many men were unhappy about it, and the churches were also unhappy about it. The plays that will be discussed in this presentation, like The Twelfth Night and Dr. Faustus, had women roles, and they were also played by boys, as you'll get to see. The last question was, what is the role and status allocated to males and females at this time? So I made a comparison. The roles of women were supposed to be meek and subservient, and they were told that their place was in the home to take care of the children, the husband, and do all the cooking and cleaning. Religion played a big part because women were supposed to practice chastity, and they were supposed to always be seen as socially acceptable to the public eye. Women were not allowed to be doctors and lawyers. They were only allowed to be bakers. They could weave clothes. They were midwives, and most were housewives. They were granted access to go to schools at this time, and the rich sent their girls to all-girls schools if they could. The role of men they were seen as the leaders of the household. They were the strong ones that the women and children had to listen to. They were supposed to be the protectors and the providers for the family, and they could be whatever profession that they preferred. And they were also granted opportunities in education, but they had way more opportunities than women did at this time. To get some insight on Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe, I decided to make this slide. Since Marlowe is 2 months older than Shakespeare, the gender roles were the same for both of their plays. Women were not allowed to perform on English public stages at this time, so who did, you might ask? Adolescent boys. To make the female characters seem feminine, the boys would wear makeup and dresses when playing the part, and this also sparked a discussion on what was socially acceptable because they took into account cross-dressing and sexual orientation when playing these roles. Women in Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. So there are 3 major women's roles. Viola, who is disguised as Cesario, a man. Olivia, with whom Orsino, Andrew, and Malvolio want as a wife, and she wants nothing to do with him. Maria, who is Olivia's gentlewoman. So Viola dresses as a man, thinking that she would put in a good word for Orsino, who wants to wed Olivia. Olivia actually starts to fall for Viola, who is also known to her as Cesario, not knowing the truth of her disguise. Maria wants Olivia to be with Andrew and devises a plot for Malvolio to get out of the way. Olivia plays the one with whom every man wants, which is a typical role for women in plays. Maria plays a gentlewoman, which is also typical, but the one who is different is Viola because she dresses as a man and goes by Cesario. Olivia, in thinking that Cesario is Sebastian, Viola's twin brother, marries him. When all is revealed, it is told that Maria is now wed to Toby, Olivia is wed to Sebastian, and Viola is to wed Orsino. As you can see, Shakespeare has many more women's roles than most playwrights at his time. Dr. Faustus, written by Christopher Marlowe. Dr. Faustus is the stereotypical religious man, and he's a curious one, which drives him to become a user of dark magic, turning his character into a corrupt one. His role is the only one that's important, really, because all the other characters are minor, and some of them also have magic, and they abuse it as well. There are only mentions or small scenes with women, and again, they are the stereotypical roles of wives or queens or gods. In the end, Dr. Faustus is aware of his wrongdoings, but still gets sent to hell, again showing a play where they contrast good versus evil. And Marlowe follows most playwrights in the sense that the men are the leads and the women are barely mentioned or barely shown.
Stories during the Middle Ages. In earlier times, stories were told by clergymen. They were more educated than others and could read and write. These monks reproduced several stories over the years. Characteristics of medieval literature. Heroism. From Germanic and Christian backgrounds, these were included in stories such as Beowulf and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The Christian message was also an important aspect of these stories. There were a lot of concerns for the future and no interest in social changes. This trend continued well into the 14th century. Almost all of the stories included fighting, supernatural elements, and love. Storytellers traveled from town to town, getting food and shelter in exchange for sharing their stories. There were some who sang and played instruments, and they were widely valued as a source of entertainment. Audiences in the 16th century drama. Open public theaters were rather diverse class-wise, with the unemployed, immigrants, poor, and wealthy all attending. There were a couple of different levels to watch the play, with groundlings, or the sheepish, only paying a penny to stand and watch the play, which were oftentimes upwards of 3 hours. One of the best and most expensive seats were located in the lords' rooms, which were also in the galleries and balconies. This diverse crowd made it popular play spots for cut purses and thieves, who used the crowded standing area to steal and cause problems. Because the open area theaters were more visited by riffraff, the audience were not always the best behaved. They oftentimes threw food, interrupted the play, and even jumped up on stage. This led to playwrights moving their plays away from these theaters and into indoor ones more frequently visited by the cultured wealthy. Dramas in the 16th century were primarily used as social gatherings, as they were more serious than festivals at the time, but not as revered as galas. Because the dramas were presented in an open theater, it was easy to find and congregate with familiar faces. This led theaters to become hotspots for both young and older ladies as a way to gossip and flirt with the many men that attended the shows. Plays were considered to be occupation for the idle. The plague. The plague was an extremely deadly and contagious disease that wrecked Europe from 1347 to 1665. Because of how contagious the plague was, there were several outbreaks throughout the year, resulting in millions of deaths. This incited paranoia in the community, and every time there was an outbreak, almost all theaters were shut down in fear of spreading or contracting the disease. The plague also affected the theme of plays at the time, with outbreaks taking the lives of loved ones and the writers' families. They wrote sadder and more tragic plays as a result. For example, some scholars believe that after influenced by his son's death by the plague, Shakespeare wrote his play Hamlet. Characters and the audience. Because of the separation between the wealthy and poor, there were oftentimes rifts between the members, with the wealthy siding with and cheering for the high-class characters and the poor doing the same with the lower-class ones. This furthered the divide between the two classes, as each had their own opinions on who was the good guy and the bad guy. The medical field in the 16th century. Immigration to large cities like London led to a larger population and therefore many future patients. At the time in England, medical law allowed any medical practice to occur as long as the patients in question let it, and the medical marketplace was unregulated. This meant that anyone could become a surgeon or a specialist. While there were scholars and educated physicians in the mix, there were also individuals and small medical networks who could be specialists if they wanted to profit off of patient competition. There was, however, a sort of guild, while out of place today, were commonplace in the Middle Ages and early modern period. For emerging in the 12th century, the most professional surgeons in England would also happen to be trained barbers that came together in a guild or an association for their craft. Aside from performing legitimate surgery, barber surgeons were most notorious for the practice of bloodletting. Bloodletting is fairly self-explanatory. It's the practice of letting a patient bleed out until the infection or illness has left the bloodstream. This practice has some success, as barber surgeons had more success until they become separate trades later in centuries. These guilds had the most expertise at the time. The medical marketplace still had an unorganized, unregulated array of improper practitioners and complete frauds. That sort of climate can lead to exploitation, further physical damage, and an overall increase in death. To create order in this market, decrease the general death rate, and ultimately attain control of the market, one surgical guild made a plan. The Barber Surgeon Company was the largest guild of licensed surgeons and barbers in London. They wanted control over surgery in London. To obtain control, the guild created educational networks that trained people to be professional surgeons and to have a moral upright in order to promote the guild. By spreading their brand and education this way, the Barber Surgeons Company brought expertise and safer practices back to the medical market and introduced a prototype of professionalism to medical practices. I do use the term expertise a little loosely, since these surgeons thought it would be alright to let their patients bleed out.
Politics of the 16th century England. The Roman Church. The Roman Church had a lot of power over the people in Europe, and much of Europe is Roman Catholic, and the head of the Roman Church was the Pope. The Pope had the most power in the Roman Catholic system. He could do anything that he desired, like making alliances and treaties with foreign countries. A large part of the Roman Church had power over was to who someone can and can't marry. The Protestant movement. This is a movement that had been mostly led by John Calvin and Martin Luther's efforts to trying to break down the powers of the Roman Church. Martin Luther talked about the dogma of the Catholic Church and how they kept people in the dark about God, and he believed that everyone should read about the Bible and understand the actual meaning to it. John Calvin furthered Luther's ideas, which were made more accessible due to the invention of the movable type press. King Henry VIII. King Henry VIII was the ruler of England during the 16th century, and he had a large impact on how religion was in England during his time. He felt as if the Roman Church had too much power over how everything the people of England did, like who they would and wouldn't wed, and King Henry VIII did not want them to be able to do this. He had only one male heir to his throne. King Henry VIII against the Roman Church. King Henry wanted to have a son so he could have an heir. He wanted to get a divorce with his wife, but the Roman Church would not allow him to do so. The Roman Church controlled a lot of the power in Europe because of the amount of wealth it had accumulated over the years and the amount of followers they have over in England. King Henry decided that he could create a church of his own that he would call the Church of England. This church allowed for the people of England to have more religious and political freedom for his people, like the ability to divorce. He did not want to have to split from Rome, but his desire to have a son as his heir caused him to have no other choice. Queen Elizabeth. She became the Queen of England once Henry VIII's son Edward died at a young age. England was able to prosper under her rule. People questioned a female ruler of them, but after she was able to convince them that she was fit for rule, they followed her. She was an incredible politician and was cruel when it came to battle. Elizabeth was able to defeat the almighty Spanish Armada. Under her rule, England became a great power in Europe.
And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you for listening.